If you followed the Super Bowl at all this week, did you spare a thought on Monday for Jack and Jackie Harborough? Jack and Jackie, you may have heard, are the mum and dad of John and Jim, respective coaches of the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers, who incredibly, those two brothers, found themselves facing off as coaches of opposite teams in the Super Bowl. Jack and Jackie, the parents, were asked before the game, will you wear purple during the game or will you wear red? Are you supporting John or are you going for Jim? How would you be as their mum and dad watching the game? Who do you barrack for? It's complex, isn't it? In the end, it was 34 points to 31. Jack, the champion, who you can see on the screen. Jim, the loser, who nobody took photos of. As their parent, do you jump up and down and celebrate? Or do you commiserate? Whose side are you on? Now, I guess that is something like the dilemma that God has got, or so it seems, when it comes to something like the world wars, when England and Germany were both claiming God on their side and writing majestic battle hymns and praying every week in their cathedrals and in their trenches for victory, each side claiming God was with them. Or American politics today with the Democrats and the Republicans, both claiming God with them and not the other guys. The Democrats with their emphasis on social justice, saying God is with us. Republicans with their conservative morality. God can't possibly be with those other guys. He is with us. Now, on a more personal level, the more common kind of spirituality is to say, well, of course, God's actually with everyone, isn't he? Whoever you conceive him to be, that God is a matter of personal preference. And that if there's a God at all, it's with a small g God. It's the God you find in nature and in the trees and in every living person. And the idea that your God would be on one side or the other side, on your side or my side, is kind of offensive, because God is an equal opportunity God who is with everyone. Now, we've got a little video that I want to show you that Bob thought I'd forgotten, that just illustrates how people think about that these days. The guy in the video is Russell Brand, who some of you might know, hopefully you're not fans of, but some very strong ideas about God and what he's like, about his version of God. Just take a look, it takes about a minute, and get a taste.
You make your living making a mockery of sin.
In fact, since you promote sin, you hate all these kind people in your heart.
I don't. I love them.
That's why he applauds your sin, because he hates you all.
I don't applaud any sins what's hurting people or yourselves. Mate, you're good on the scripture and verse, but I've got to say this to you. Have you considered that the Bible, like all religious doctrine, may be allegorical and symbolic to direct us towards one holy entity of love, as opposed to a specific litigious text to direct the behaviour of human beings? The Bible wasn't literally written by a cosmic entity. It goes into sex stuff, because I just think it's such a low priority when there's so many important things happening. Like, don't you think, this is my genuine question, right, what do you reckon God thinks about the ecological disaster and the growing power of corporations? Don't you think he is worried about that? I think you're nice people and I really like your passion and everything, but I just feel that our first duty as human beings must be to be loving and tolerant of one another, and I think we're facing so much crisis and difficulty at this time on our planet. We can't focus on people's privacy.
We love you enough to tell you what God's standard is. That's the...
I love you too.
Now, there it is. We're going to think a little more about that at the end, but you see, surely God is an equal opportunity sort of God. Everyone's, no matter who you are, where or how, no matter your race or creed or faith or no faith, God and me are mates. It's all about tolerance. God and you are mates. God and everybody are mates. Totally non-selective, like Jack and Jackie Harborough with their two sons at the footy. Now, it's kind of a nice politically correct idea, isn't it? Which only starts falling down when you come to the pages of the Bible and meet Jesus. And when you see that the idea of God with us is localised and pinpointed in a very specific part of space and time, in a very concrete and tangible way, which opens up the prospect, you see, that there are some who God is very much with and others the direct opposite. And who those two groups are might not be quite as you expect. And incredibly, you see, we're going to see it's all bundled up in a baby in a basket. A baby who you'll know from the reading, and you can see from the page in front of you, comes at the tail end of a very precisely arranged family tree which tells the story of the nation of Israel in three very distinct movements. Now, if you're not a subscriber to ancestry.com.au and you're not a family tree kind of person, your eyes will glaze over just looking at it. You probably dozed off during the reading. And my advice is, if you're about to start work on a blockbuster novel, do not start this way. A list of 47 almost unpronounceable names. And let's just get it over and done with and say that listening to a sermon on Matthew chapter 1 isn't going to make it into anyone's list of top 10 good times. But the good news is that almost all you need to know is there in verse 1 and in verse 17. Verse 1, have a look, it says this: a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. This Jesus Christ, which means Jesus the anointed one, Jesus the one who will be king, this Jesus comes packaged in history in a royal family line. He is a descendant, you see, we're told right at the start, of the great King David. He's in the national line of Israel, descendants of the great father Abraham. And then if you look at the way it's structured, and verse 17 tells you this if you missed it, there are the three great epochs. Epochs is, I think, the appropriate word. Three great eras in the history of Israel, which verse 17 puts like this. Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile in Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Christ. Now you can sort of see it set out on the page that way if you look back, or get a sense of it on the screen in a moment. Three groups of 14. Thanks, Bob. The print's pretty small, but I've just squeezed it all in there on the screen and colour-coded it so you can see. Three phases of the history of Israel. And it's worth noticing them because this is one of those priceless moments, if you don't actually know much about the Old Testament, that you can actually get the big picture snapshot in just a couple of minutes. In the red, years of promise and fulfilment, starting from Abraham. God came to Abraham and promised him, out of you, I'm going to change the world. Out of you, I'm going to make a mighty nation, a people who will know me and love me and serve me and honour me. I'm going to be their God and they're going to be my people. I'm going to give you a land of your own to enjoy. And if anyone was ever going to be able to say God is with us, it was that little nation of Israel. So over those generations from Abraham grows and grows and grows as God keeps his promise to Abraham. That's a line that runs all the way to King David, who, as King David looks around him and surveys the boundaries of Israel, he knows God has kept his promises to Abraham to the letter. There's only one hitch. God says to Israel, the one thing that you've got to do if you want to stay in the land is to honour me as your God. Because you are my people, Israel, I'm going to give you my laws to live by. And rule number one is don't go chasing any other gods. Don't go making up gods for yourselves. Only me. Now look, here's the trick. As you're looking at the family tree and as you get to the purple, it's a royal line on the screen behind me. They are descendants of the great King David, but it is a downward spiral of incredible unfaithfulness. And if you read it sometime in the New Testament books of 1 and 2 Kings, it's a tragedy that unfolds. After such a good start, after God fulfilling all his promises that king after king, right from King Solomon, the supposedly wise one, they go all the way downhill, rejecting God time after time, to the point where God says enough is enough. That purple section, it's all downhill. God says enough's enough, and he brings first of all the Assyrians and then the Babylonians to take everyone and everything away, to take Israel into exile. Look, here is the reality. Israel fails. There's no other way to put it. And after that glorious moment under King David, the history of Israel is a train wreck. These are the people who said, God is with us, who said, we are the people of God. And they sure didn't live like it. And when the exile comes, it sure didn't look like it. And in spite of the fact that after 70 years in Babylon they're allowed to go home, the humiliation goes on for 14 more generations. Some of them come home, most of them stay in Babylon. It's more comfortable in the end. But the ones that come home, they build up their little rocky city wall and they build their little stone temple. Nothing like what it was before. And then the Romans come and they crush them all over again. Verses 12 to 16 in the green on the screen. Eliakim, Azor, Zadok, Achim, Eliud, Eleazar, all still in the line of King David, yet none of them with anything to rule. Because Israel's just a shell of what it used to be. Who knows if things can ever be mended? Who knows if David's line of kings is ever going to rule anything again? At which point you get verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. 3 slices of Israel's history. Verse 17 again recaps it. Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile in Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Christ. 14 going up the stairs, the promises being fulfilled. 14 going down the stairs, Israel being unfaithful. 14 living in the basement. And then Jesus, who is called Christ, which again means anointed king. There is going to be, after all these years, another enthronement. And this Jesus, in spite of his very unusual birth, or maybe because of his very unusual birth, is going to put everything right. Now, it doesn't have to be Christmas to read these next verses, but if it helps, I guess we could put on some shopping centre Christmas carols in the background. But follow along from verse 18 to 24. Mary, you see, is pledged to be married to Joseph. But amazingly, in fact disturbingly if you're Mary, she finds herself pregnant with no human explanation. This is embarrassing. This looks dodgy. Kind of like the other women you might have noticed scattered through the genealogy list. Did you notice them? Every now and then a mother is mentioned. Tamar, famous because she seduced a father-in-law. Rahab, the famous Jericho prostitute in verse 5. Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, who had been Uriah's wife before David's unfaithfulness with her in verse 6. This is the kind of thing that could have in the old days, at the very least, have left a trail of people gossiping in the supermarket. Or if you're under Sharia law, left you stoned to death. Joseph is embarrassed, verse 19. But because he's a compassionate man, he doesn't want to publicly shame her. Just a quiet divorce, which was what you had to do to break a betrothal back then, not just a quick text message to say the wedding's off. A full divorce. But Joseph's divorce plans are changed in a flash, do you notice, when an angel comes, and you see it's actually important that Joseph, son of David, hangs around. It's important that this baby who's going to be born with no earthly father is still born into the family line of kings because he is the Christ. He is the one singled out to be king. And more than that, he is about to be something and do something spectacular. So read from verse 20. Joseph is thinking of a quiet divorce. But after he'd considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what's conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She'll give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. You see, the name Jesus, it means Jehovah saves. God saves. See, just look again at their history. It's not glorious. It's broken. It's not a story of their faithfulness the people who are meant to be the God with us people of all the people in the world, you've just got to open any page in the Old Testament and you are face to face with their sin, their wickedness. The Old Testament is just one horror story after another, which is why Israel in the end finds themselves in exile. It's because of their sin, the consequence of their constant rebellion, which is why Israel finds himself cut off from God, why they're living still under God's judgment. The place that should have been the place of God's blessing, an oasis of blessing in all the world. You just have to turn the pages in Matthew's Gospel, you'll see the signs everywhere. People are sick and demon-possessed, dying, crushed under heavy Roman rule. All signs from back in the book of Deuteronomy of a land living under God's judgment. That's the land of Israel when Jesus comes. And now here he is, Jesus born, the one called God saves, the one who is going to save them not just from the symptoms but the cause. The one who is going to save them from their sin. Call him Jesus, God saves. Now you'll notice he's got another name as well, or at least a title. Have a look at verse 22. All of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, the virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means in the Hebrew, God with us. And he is here with an offer to Israel to turn things around. He is here to save them from their sins if they want it. In their groaning land, he is going to give them a glimpse of the new creation in amazing ways, if they want to see it. He's going to tell them in no uncertain terms what they need to hear to be saved from their sins, if they want to hear it. He is going to be in space and time, absolutely concretely, God, their God, in the flesh with them, if they want to know him. This is Emmanuel, God with us, which is spectacular and it's astonishing. But you want to know what's even more astonishing? As we turn the page over these next weeks and keep reading, by and large, Israel just doesn't want it. They don't want anything to do with him. It's obvious right from the start. The scribes and the Pharisees, who we'll meet in the next few weeks, absolutely full of religion, absolutely full of self-righteousness, and they do not want to know him. We all know how it ends. And so to come back to my question at the start, whose side is God on? What do you reckon at a point like this? He comes to be on their side and by their side. God with us. They choose the other side. They think they're on God's side because of their religion and their rules. But when he comes, they vote him off the island. They don't want anything to do with him. Now, here's the point. I want to say to you this morning that if Matthew is right, and if this little bundle of joy at the end of this long family line really is God with us, then there's only going to be one way to decide who's on side with who. And that is the question, where do you line up with Jesus? Do you get that? Jesus is God with us. And if you want to be with God, then you need to stick with Jesus. Which again is the drama we're going to see played out through Matthew's Gospel, and a profound rearranging of the boundary lines of who's with God and who God's with and who's not. And it's all going to be to do with who is with Jesus and who's not. What they do with him, who accepts him, who rejects. Because he is in himself in a way that Buddha wasn't and Muhammad wasn't. Or at the very least, he's claiming to be God with us. If you want to be with God, you'll be with him. See, this is the interesting thing. It might be stating the obvious, but most people just don't agree with that. Mitch, in his summer seminar a couple of weeks back, you might have been here, a couple of great Wednesday nights, Mitch talked about the fact that our culture is shifting, and it's not necessarily just the simplistic thing of saying that our culture is rejecting the idea of God, but something a little bit more subtle. This slide behind me came out of a book called Permission Evangelism that Mitch talked about, and Michael Simpson, who wrote it, argues that 20 or 30 years ago, and in all the years before that, in our sort of Christianised culture back then, your average non-Christian, they basically agreed with us on one thing, and that was that God was on one side and they were on the other. And they had a sense that things between them and God just weren't quite right. Not that they'd necessarily do anything about it, not that they were too worried about it, not that they necessarily cared, but they'd probably say that God and his church people were on one side and they were either happily or unhappily on the other side of the gulf. And every now and then you'd meet someone and you'd tell them how Jesus was the bridge between those two sides. Jesus was the way across the gap. And they'd be delighted and they'd find peace with God. Maybe this is your story. They would find peace with God through the Lord Jesus. Now here's what's changed, and it's a generational thing. There are still people like that these days. But here's today, by and large. The thing that's changed is that these days everyone just assumes that God is on their side. No matter who they are, no matter what they do. It's an abstract God, it's their idea of God. But the main thing is, their assumption is that if there's any gap, they're on one side of it and God is on the same side. The God of tolerance, the God in the trees, the God in every living thing. The inoffensive God who you just define to suit yourself, like Russell Brand does in the video we saw earlier. Do you remember what he said? You might think the same. Sin, that's just the stuff that hurts other people or yourself. Otherwise, do what you like. The Bible, just allegorical, just symbolic, nothing more. God, a holy entity of love and tolerance. That's what I like to think God is. He didn't write the Bible or inspire it or have anything to do with it, really. Our first and only duty is to be tolerant and save the planet. Anything goes. Now, he's debating guys from Westboro Baptist Church on that clip. You can find it on YouTube and watch it all. And I'm not saying they were any closer to the truth. In fact, I'm not sure they were. I think they're right over there with the Pharisees we'll see debating Jesus as we work through Matthew's Gospel. They're all about morals and rules and laws. But the point is, you see, Russell Brand, who's a comedian, thinks he's got every right to say for himself what God is and what God isn't, and what God likes and what God doesn't, regardless of Jesus. Do you notice that? Jesus, nowhere. And if you don't want to have anything to do with the one who is God with us, how would you think you can claim God? Listen to these words from Paul later on, Colossians chapter 1. If you want to get a sense of how big Christ is. Matthew's bringing us in right at the start of the story. Well, Paul is out there spreading the news much later on. And here's what he says about Jesus who saves, about Emmanuel, God with us. Here is why knowing Jesus is the key to knowing God. Paul says in Colossians, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him," in Jesus, "and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." Now, that's where Matthew's heading. That's where we'll see Matthew's gospel unfolding and taking us to. I just want you to get this from the start. We're going to see the unfolding tale of the one in whom all God's fullness dwells. We're going to see him coming first to his people, Israel, who claim to be God's people, who claim God's on their side. But it is going to be very clear where Israel and their scribes and their priests and their Pharisees and their everyday people stand with God. And it's going to be absolutely about where they stand with Jesus and what they do with him. And whether you think so or not, where you stand with God is absolutely about where you stand with Jesus as well. Same with your friends. Same with Russell Brand. Same with all of the world around us. Same with the institution called church. Same with people who might seem very, very religious. It is one thing to assume we've got God on our side of that gap. The bad news is if we're leaving Jesus out of the mix, God's not on your side of the gap at all. And the gap is very real. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to redefine everything like Russell Brand or not, you can redefine it, you can laugh about it. But Jesus came, do you see Paul's words? To reconcile to God all things, to close up that gap by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Which, you see, brings then the very good news that if you have grabbed hold of him, if you have accepted him, if you have put your faith in him, then there really is peace with God through his blood shed on the cross. And we really can say God's with us and we're with God. Because whether you're feeling close to God today or whether you're not, the fact is you are. Because at the end of that long family line, at the end of that history of disaster for Israel, all God's fullness came to dwell in the flesh. God with us, Emmanuel.